On this episode of Dungeon Denizens, we're going to deconstruct the Golem. Here on Dungeon Denizens, we've spoken broadly about religion in passing before, mostly historically. But this will be the first episode that explores something derived directly from a central conceit of a living religion. That means the interpretation is no longer of folklore and instead is of doctrines and tenets held by a variety of religions. Our goal here is folklore, so while I may get a few things wrong, likely about a great many things, any mistakes I make regarding the Jewish or any other faith is born of ignorance and not intent or malice. Special thanks to Chaim Patak. The idea of an artificial creation, given supernatural life, is widespread in a variety of human societies in disparate parts of the world. The Mayan Popol Vuh details 4 attempts to create man. First animals, then wet clay people, then wooden people, and finally corn dough. Greeks made their automatons. A Yiddish and Slavic folktale is the clay boy, which combines elements of the golem and the gingerbread man, in which a lonely couple make a child out of clay, with disastrous or comical consequences. In one common Russian version, an older couple whose children have left home make a boy out of clay and dry him by their hearth. The clay boy comes to life. At first the couple are delighted and treat him like a real child, but the clay boy does not stop growing and eats all their food, then all their livestock. And then the clay boy eats his parents. The clay boy rampages through the village until he is smashed by a quick-thinking goat. Humanity is a creative animal, and so creation and the creator weigh heavily on all believers. However, the golem of Jewish mysticism is both unique and uniquely detailed, meaning we are going to start from there. There is a legend that a man brought water to clay and shaped it to life. And because of this, he could create life and cheat death for a time. Humans are fascinated with death, as we will all someday die. We write songs and stories in tribute to death, or the delay of it. We develop cultures that embrace death. The entirety of ancient Egyptian life seems to have been centered around shifting from the land of the living to the realm of the dead. In that regard, the power of death comes to us all, but the power of creation is awesome in the real meaning, the power of God to imbue life into dust at will. To harness such a power would be to hold the reins of the universe and cheat that finality of death. Modern Western culture does this with machines and chemicals, while ancient Jews did it with the golem. Unlike Christianity, the Jewish faith does not emphasize original sin as being a fall from grace for humanity, and that striving towards the secrets of creation is not to supplant God, but to know Him. After all, what greater miracle could there be than the miracle of creation? It is not the mad scientist and his hubris, it is the pious adherent striving towards the ideal, the reaching into the darkness to embrace the divine. The first form of true magic was perhaps language. Tolkien specifically pointed out the adjective in his essay on fairy stories. But how powerful, how stimulating to the very faculty that produced it, was the invention of the adjective. No spell or incantation in fairy is more potent, and that is not surprising. Such incantations might indeed be said to be only another view of adjectives, a part of speech in a mythical grammar. The mind that thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift, also conceived of magic that would make heavy things light and able to fly, turn gray lead into yellow gold, and the still rock into swift water. If it could do the one, it could do the other. It inevitably did both. Or, as Patak noted, early man was utterly mystified by language. He could grasp the tangible. A sword was a sword, a sheep was a sheep, but words gave shape to the intangible. Letters seemed to possess magic. They had awesome power. After all, hadn't God created with words? God spoke, and there was. Writing is obviously a core aspect to many religions, perhaps prototypically the faith of the Jews, the people of the book. Psalm 139:16 reveals Adam himself, created of dust, was a golem until God breathed full life into him. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Tanakh, known as the Pentateuch, tells us the method for the fashioning of a golem, and the first to undertake this trial was Abraham. Abraham sat alone and meditated on how to make a golem, but could understand nothing, until a heavenly voice went forth and said,
"Are you trying to set yourself up as my equal? I am one, and you yourself cannot understand it. Therefore take a companion and meditate on it together, and you will understand."
To Jews, God may permit a man to strive for the divine, and may approach it, but never fully. And so Abraham went to Shem, son of Noah, and studied together. Then they understood. The Jewish people have suffered millennia of persecution even before the diaspora. Their temples and holiest of holies repeatedly desecrated by foreign powers such as the Greeks, repelled by the Maccabees, and later the Roman Empire. During these conflicts, Jewish people were massacred without pity or remorse. The mothers of circumcised infants were slain. To many the apocalypse was at hand, and the coming of a Messiah was expected. The religion changed during that period, turning inward to find hidden meanings and messages to explain the hardships God had wrought upon these people. Practitioners could employ mysticism and magic, the hidden powers of words, letters, and numbers. This provided a backdrop to contemplate the mystery of God through wondrous imagery. This inward, meditative form came to be known as Kabbalah. This tradition of Abraham as magician, imbued with divine knowledge through writing, is the basis for much of the Kabbalah, the esoteric magical art, and it is said the source of the Sephirot, or Tree of Life. One such capability was the creation and animation of a golem. The Talmud describes how the prophet Jeremiah, as well as the sage Rabbi, crafted golems, but righteous though they were, the golems could not speak. To have created such a being would have made Rabbi the equal of God. No golem from later legend would have the power of speech. This tale fascinated medieval Jews. Could one be so righteous as to create a true golem? And if so, how would one go about it? During the Moorish control of Spain, around 1000 AD, Jews were quite prosperous under Islamic rule, and scholars openly published their methodology for the creation of a golem. In reality, the intricate recipe is as much a meditative exercise as it is an attempt to create a being. The Kabbalist Abraham Abulafia presents a magic formula of enormous complexity, which required combinations of over 200 alphabets and an awareness of intricate details, such as the weight of dust that fills a small spoon, the size of which must already be known. Water is added to the dust and blown upon while pouring, while reciting a letter of the name of the divine simultaneously and loudly. On and on the formula goes. With the coming of the Crusades, the violence imparted upon the Jewish people began anew. Thousands were killed in Germany, entire Jewish villages were burnt to the ground, and when the Crusaders took Jerusalem, they killed each and every Jew. This rift between Jews and Christians would last until modern day. Kabbalists redoubled their efforts, and soon French and German Jews started publishing their own formulae for golems. There are rabbis said to be followed by mute golems, and the French rabbi Gaon described the incantations and 462 circles to be danced strictly in the proper direction. His disciples are said to have gone in the wrong direction and sank into the earth up to their navels, crying for help. The oldest description of the creation of a golem by a historical figure is included in a tradition connected to Rabbi Eliyahu of Chelm. A Polish Kabbalist, writing in about 1630 to 1650, reported the creation of a golem by Rabbi Eliyahu thus: "And I have heard, in a certain and explicit way, from several respectable persons, that one man close to our time, whose name is R. Eliyahu, the master of the name, who made a creature out of matter," using the Hebrew word golem, "and form," using the Hebrew word zura. "And it performed hard work for him for a long period, and the name of Emet was hanging upon his neck, until he finally removed it for a certain reason, the name from his neck, and it turned to dust." A similar account was reported by a Christian author, Christoph Arnold, in 1674. Rabbi Jacob Emden elaborated on the story in a book published in 1748. "As an aside, I'll mention here what I heard from my father's holy mouth regarding the golem created by his ancestor, the Gaon R. Eliyahu Baal Shem of blessed memory. When the Gaon saw that the golem was growing larger and larger, he feared that the golem would destroy the universe. He then removed the holy name that was embedded on his forehead, thus causing him to disintegrate and returned to dust. Nonetheless, while he was engaged in extracting the holy name from him, the golem injured him, scarring him on the face." A different version of the legend states that while trying to remove the life-giving name of God in an attempt to destroy the raging beast, Rabbi Elijah was crushed to death under the weight of the golem as it fell to pieces. Elijah's grandsons, Tzvi Ashkenazi and his son Jacob Emden, were both great halakhists. They discussed the legal status of the golem. Could the golem be counted in the minyan, the quorum of 10 men required for prayer? But human form and modicum of understanding were not enough to make something human. During this period, passages from the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, were studied as a means to create and animate a golem. It was believed that golems could be activated by an ecstatic experience induced by the ritualistic use of various letters of the Hebrew alphabet, forming a Shem, any one of the names of God, wherein the Shem was written on a piece of paper and inserted in the mouth or in the forehead of the golem. A golem is inscribed with Hebrew words in some tales, such as the word emet, meaning truth in Hebrew. Written on its forehead, the golem could then be deactivated by removing the first letter, aleph, in emet, thus changing the inscription from truth to death. Other versions add that an entity of clay would be brought to life by placing into his mouth a shem with a magic formula, and it could later be immobilized by pulling out the shem or by reversing the creative combinations. Rabbi Jacob ben Shalom arrived at Barcelona from Germany in 1325 and remarked that the law of destruction is the reversal of the law of creation. European alchemists became fascinated with Kabbalah and the pursuit of the golem. There seems to be a lot of overlap. Both seek out a physical manifestation of their labor and unending life. The Philosopher's Stone and the golem were one and the same. Perhaps the greatest of alchemists, Paracelsus, even used Kabbalistic knowledge in his attempt at the first test tube baby, the homunculus. In these violent times, the Jewish people were highly regarded by few and dreaded by a great many across Europe, accusing the Kabbalistic meditations of baby sacrifice and dark rituals. Persecution continued in pogroms across the continent. The Bohemian city of Prague has been known as the place of 1,000 miracles and countless horrors. And here, in this terrible atmosphere, we meet perhaps the most famous of the Jewish form, the Golem of Prague. Judalol ben Bezalel, widely known to scholars of Judaism as the Maharal of Prague, he is, for many Jews, the personification of rational thought in Talmudic law. He was a rabbi, a mystic, a Kabbalist, and during his nearly 100 years of life was the Jewish spiritual head of Prague. Rudolf II was the Holy Roman Emperor, King of Hungary and Croatia, King of Bohemia and Archduke of Austria. He was also a member of the House of Habsburg. Rudolf's legacy has traditionally been viewed in 3 ways. An ineffectual ruler whose mistakes led directly to the 30 Years' War, a great and influential patron of Northern Mannerist art, and a devotee of occult arts and learning. Rudolf was a devotee of both astrology and alchemy, surrounding himself with the likes of Edward Kelly, John Dee, and Nostradamus. During his reign, Emperor Rudolf would meet with the Maharal to discern Kabbalistic knowledge to aid in his own quest for the Philosopher's Stone. Prague flourished as a seat of scientific thought, yet even there, in a place of higher learning, persecution still followed. Despite the wealth of information, just as voluminous were the books banned, both Jewish and Protestant. The Jewish people were forced to gather around a crucifix and hear sermons from Jesuit priests in order to remain within the city. The Jewish ghettos regularly were emptied and its inhabitants harassed, or worse. To protect the Jewish community, in 1600 the Maharal constructed the golem out of clay from the banks of the Vltava River and brought it to life through rituals and incantations. The golem was called Yosef and was known as Yoselit. it was said that he could make himself invisible and summon spirits from the dead. The only care required of the golem was that he couldn't be active on the day of Sabbath, Saturday. Rabbi Lowell deactivated the golem on Friday evenings by removing the Shem before the Sabbath began, so as to let it rest on Sabbath. One Friday evening, Rabbi Lowell forgot to remove the Shem, and feared that the golem would desecrate the Sabbath. The Maharal then managed to pull the Shem from his mouth and immobilize him in front of the synagogue, whereupon the golem fell in pieces. The golem's body was stored in the attic Genizah of the old new synagogue, where it would be restored to life again if needed. According to legend, the body of Rabbi Lowell's golem still lies in the synagogue's attic. Some strictly Orthodox Jews believed that the Maharal did actually create a golem. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the last rabbi of Lubavitch, wrote that his father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, was asked about his experiences visiting the attic of the old new synagogue, and he said that he was unwilling to speak about it. Yosef Yitzhak wrote in his memoirs that he visited the old new synagogue's attic, and his father was very grave when he descended back to the ground floor, saying that he had recited psalms for his safety while he visited the attic. Schneier L. Lehman writes in an article that Yosef Yitzhak's daughter, Chana Gurari, related to Rabbi Berel Junik that his father had seen the form of a man wrapped up and covered. The body was lying on its side, and that he said that he was very frightened by the sight. I looked around at some of the shemus, discarded ritual objects, that were there, and left frightened by what I had seen. The story of the Golem of Prague became a German silent horror film, 1915's The Golem, the first of a trilogy. The third film, a 1921 prequel, is the only one to survive. The film is mostly an overlooked remnant of an earlier cinematic era, and deservedly so. In the film, the Rabbi Low is changed to a mad sorcerer, replete with spellbooks that are mocking reflections of sacred Hebrew texts. Instead of using a Shem with truth written upon it, the wicked sorcerer communes with Asmodeus, an archdemon that dwells in hell, who whispers a foul rite for the corrupted Jew to use. The golem is then a brutish, silent thug who terrorizes the ghetto. The film is highly anti-Semitic, conflating sacred traditions with sinister ritual, bordering on obscene. In 1967, the British film It was released, also known as Curse of the Golem or Anger of the Golem. It portrays the Golem of Prague as being stored in an English warehouse that subsequently is burned to the ground, leaving only rubble and the golem, believed by curators to be a primitive statue, a series of mysterious deaths that surround the statue, and eventually Roddy McDowall's character, an edible tribute to Norman Bates, discovers the secret of the golem and its Shem. He then takes control of the golem and sends it on a murder spree, which of course was not the goal of Lowell's golem. A Hebrew warning accompanies this version. Power bringeth destruction, beware lest it be unleashed. He who will find the secret of my life at his feet, him will I serve until beyond time. He who shall evoke me in the 17th century, beware, for I cannot by fire be destroyed. He who shall evoke me in the 18th century, beware, for I cannot by fire or by water be destroyed. He who evokes me in the 19th century, beware, for I cannot by fire or by water or by force be destroyed. He who in the 20th century shall dare evoke me, beware, for neither by fire, nor water, nor force, nor anything by man created can I be destroyed. He who in the 21st century evokes me must be of God's hand himself, because on this earth the person of man existeth no more. The film concludes with nuclear warheads being detonated on the golem, to no avail. Without doubt, there exists a still more famous golem, one whose divine purpose is replaced by the coldness of science. Frankenstein was written in 1818 by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, and according to family tradition, I myself am a relative. In the novel, the young physician Victor Frankenstein assembles his own golem, not from dust and water, but from the flesh of cadavers. He imbues it with life, not through the secret name of God or his will, but through the primitive graspings of science. The creation is capable of learning, understanding, speech, and revenge. Abandoned by its maker, Frankenstein's monster seeks to punish him for his short-sightedness and his hubris. Hubris has become the lesson of the golem for Western civilization, although this is an affront to the meditative pursuit of Judaism. 20th century pop culture cemented both the clay golem and especially the Frankenstein golem into stock monsters in films, comics, and eventually games. 1975's Greyhawk supplement for Dungeons & Dragons gave the golem a permanent residence in fantasy gaming, forms of flesh, clay, stone, and iron, and its final definition as a crafted monster whose traits are based more on the material of its composition instead of the method of its animation. In the city of Jerusalem, the head of a golem is a playground for the children steeped in the role of the golem. Today, golem in Hebrew means dumb or helpless, and indicates a creature incapable of mindlessly following orders. Such creatures drag millions upon millions of Jews to their deaths. A lesson far more valuable for us all when we see what evils are unleashed onto others by blindly following orders as human golems. Thanks for listening.
הוא יצא להציל את ידידיו ומשפחתו מהאימה, מגן בבחירות לו על מצחו, בכוח של 2000 איש מניע את ידו. גולם, 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 כאשר הוא נאבק אנחנו זועקים. גולם, 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 כאשר הוא מנצח אנחנו צוחקים. לנצחים איתך אנחנו על הגן, גולם שבמעגל, הוא בא לך מתוך האגדה, מאש הסכנה הוא לעולם לא ירתע, הגולם שאינו נכנע בקרב, לכן מכאן ועד עולם נלך אחריו. גולם, 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 כאשר הוא נאבק אנחנו זועקים. גולם, 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 כאשר הוא מנצח אנחנו צוחקים. לנצחים איתך אנחנו על הגל, גולם שבמעגל. גולם, 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 כאשר הוא נאבק אנחנו זועקים. גולם, זועקים